I'm very excited about today's lecture. Well, you might ask why I'm not excited about every lecture, but I am. But I'm especially excited about this one because there's so much to say about the food marketing issue. And we'll talk today about the food marketing landscape, and then in a later class, we'll talk about some of the fascinating issues that surround this topic. Self-regulatory pledges by the industry, what they've agreed to do to cut back in the face of rising public criticism of their marketing practices. We'll talk about the First Amendment of the Constitution and how that protects the ability of marketers to market their products. And we'll talk about the political landscape, about actions that people are considering taking, trying to do something about food marketing. So before we get into that, I was asked to make two announcements. One, the Yale Sustainable Food Program is having a screening this evening of a movie called Hybrid that I haven't seen, but it sounds pretty interesting. And the details here, 212 York Street at 7 o'clock, for this story of Milford Beagley, a farmer who was instrumental in the whole genetic modification of foods. So if you're interested in that, feel free to take part. And then I was also asked by the Psych-Hi group, the psychology group, to announce a panel discussion that's happening tonight in Kirtland Hall at 2 Hill House, having to do with the psychology of elections and voting behavior. And the names of the people here are the individuals from the faculty who were taking part in the discussion. And I wish I didn't have a commitment tonight, because that would actually be fun to go to. And these people who are speaking come at this issue from a variety of different angles: political science, psychology, economics, and the like. So I'll begin today, given where we are in the season, to wish you a happy Halloween. And the Halloween theme will come through in the comedy clip that I'm going to show at the end. It's probably the best comedy clip of the whole year, and it's a Lewis Black comedy clip having to do with Halloween. So I urge you to stay for that. And to show you how with it I am in terms of the seasonal relevance of what we're doing, I thought I would show this. Food-related themes for pets dressed up for Halloween. Okay, so let's talk about food marketing. I'm going to begin with showing you a clip. This is an advertisement that General Mills has put out that I believe is still running, having to do with their cereals. And I'm going to show you the clip, and then I'd just like to get your reactions to this.
Hey, check it out. What is it? It's a cereal aisle.
Everything on this side is made with whole grain.
Not every cereal is made with whole grain. But every General Mills Big G cereal is guaranteed. And it's there on every box.
Lucky Charms!
Honey Nut Cereal gets your whole grain guarantee with General Mills. It's making me hungry.
Okay, what are some thoughts about this particular clip? I mean, does this make sense? Is it just them being straightforward and factual about their cereals? What does it imply? What's embedded in this sort of a thing? Yes?
I thought it was really clever that they coupled the advertisement for something healthy or something supposedly healthy, which is whole grain, with things that people actually like to taste, like Honey Nut Cheerios or Lucky Charms.
Okay, so the point, which is a good one, is that they took the healthy message and coupled it with cereals that, you know, might be high in sugar, things that people like, with Lucky Charms being one of the examples of that. Okay. Any other reactions to this? Thoughts about it? Yes?
It's somewhat misleading because it kind of implied that the cereals were made out of 100% whole grain as opposed to just like a small fraction of it.
Okay, so it could be construed as misleading because it implies that the cereal is actually healthier than it really is. Now that's an interesting one. You both hit very core points here, and so let's follow up on those. If you take this advertisement, there's the implication that the General Mills cereals got better when they went from not being all whole grain to being whole grain. And the question is, how do consumers perceive this message, and how much healthier did those General Mills cereals get? What did they go to and from? And if you look at the actual nutrition improvement and compare that to the perception of improvement that gets created by a marketing endeavor like this, you have to wonder how the two line up. And so in order to do this, in order to know the answer to this question, we'd have to do a study to find out how much consumers believe the cereal is actually better than it used to be. And then we'd have to find out how much better it really is and compare those two numbers. And if there's a disconnect between those two, if the perceptions outrace the actual improvement in nutrition, then one could claim that an advertisement like this is misleading. Now, we don't know for a fact that that's the case if we did that research, but that would be grounds for considering something like this potentially deceptive, misleading, unfair, unhelpful, damaging to public health or whatever, and maybe create the grounds for the public to get mad about it or for the government to do something about it. Now, again, the premise that there's something misleading going on would have to be documented in research that we or others haven't done. But I use this as an example of the perceptions that get created by marketing and then the reality of the nutrition. So here are the whole grain cereals, and as you can see, this is almost as large a font on these boxes as the size of the name of the cereal itself. And you see Golden Grams, Trix, Lucky Charms, Cinnamon Toast Crunch, probably not cereals that a lot of nutritionists are prescribing to people for healthier diets. Yet the implication here is that they're somehow good. And what you can't see because it's too small is something called the goodness corner that General Mills uses. And I'll blow this up a little bit later and show you exactly what it means. So they're interesting questions when we deal with the issues of food marketing, but more or less it comes down to how much of it is there, what impact is it having, who's it having an impact on, and if the impact is bad, what can be done about it. So we're going to play a little game to see how much you guys know about food marketing. And what I'd like to do is get 3 volunteers from this side of the room and 3 volunteers for this side of the room. And I'm just going to show you icons from marketing, and then see which group of 3 people can get it the quickest. So it probably makes sense for people from the U.S. to do this because this is more U.S. oriented than what people might see otherwise. So how about 3 volunteers from here and 3 from here? Just raise your hands. Okay, come on up. Okay, come on up, you 2. How about a 3rd from over here? Come on, okay, you got it. You come up. If we don't get a volunteer, I'm going to pick people. Okay, so we've got the all-female team over here. Who can volunteer from this side? This is a fun thing to do. Okay, come on, yes, and you. And one more. Okay, come on up. Thank you guys for volunteering. All right, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to show you a series of images on the slide, and I want you to shout out loudly so we can tell which team is doing it most quickly. Shout out what product or what company that image is from, okay? So like if I showed you the Marlboro Man, then you would say Marlboro cigarettes, something like that. Okay, that's it. And then I'm going to intersperse this with some pictures of people, and I want you to tell me who the people are, okay? All right, and what I'd like you guys to do is, and so you got to shout it out loud because these folks are going to have to tell who's winning this contest. And so you guys can look at the images and see which of the teams shouts it out fastest. Okay, you ready? So here's the first one. So be assertive and let us know. Again, you don't need to confer, you can just shout it out. Okay, here's the first one.
Honey Nut Cheerios.
Okay, I think they got it over here. Honey Nut Cheerios, that's number 1, correct. Pretty fast response.
Flintstones.
Okay, well that's who they are, but.
Pebble cereal.
Okay, vitamins is right, but this is food, so the cereals, we got it right over here. Okay, so you guys are ahead 2-0 from the way I count. Okay, so Fruity Pebbles or Cocoa Pebbles or those things, okay.
Trix.
Now that was pretty close. What do you think, Ty? You think they got it? Okay, 2-1, great. You guys are right. Now, pay attention, if you will, to how quickly they're getting these things. Okay, who's this? Now, don't give them the answer. We'll ask you guys if they don't know. Okay, nobody knows. Does anybody know who this is? Yeah, Michael Chertoff, the head of Homeland Security. Okay, here's the next image. Get ready.
Pillsbury.
Okay, who got it? I'd say there, okay. Okay, you're right, Pillsbury. Here's the next one. Yeah, okay. You guys are doing great. It's getting pretty close here. You're right, Count Chocula. Chocula, you got that one fast. No, it's not Golden Grams.
Teddy Grahams.
Yeah, there you got it. Golden Crisp. So somebody said it here and you guys got it right. So you're pretty close on that one. Okay, and who's this? Do you guys know? Anybody here know?
About to move.
Okay, excellent, excellent. Somebody in the audience got it. Secretary General of the United Nations. Okay, next. All right, you guys nailed that one, Frosted Flakes. Oh, and in a minute, I'm going to see who in the audience can do the best imitation of Tony the Tiger. Okay?
Hamburglar.
Okay, very good. Hamburglar, so that's McDonald's. I think you guys got that. I think you guys are ahead on this one, so you're doing pretty well. Do you think you guys can catch up? Yeah. Can you give 110%? Can you bring your A game? All right. Can you step it up a notch?
Kool-Aid.
Great, you did it. See, you came through. All right, you just needed the Vince Lombardi talk. All right, Kool-Aid was right on that. Who's this? Anybody know? Okay, somebody in the audience got it. Okay, Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel. All right, so notice how fast people are getting the food-related images compared to these things. Okay. Fruit Loops. I think you guys got that one. Excellent. Now we just got a few more, but you're doing great on these. Okay, that was a pretty close one. Rice Krispies.
Lucky Charms.
Okay, you guys got that one. Lucky Charms, excellent. And I think I've got one more, so you can get this the fastest.
Captain Crunch.
Okay, very good. You guys got Captain Crunch. And I've got one more person, so tell me who this is. You guys know?
President 11.
Okay, you got President 11, but not as fast as you got Captain Crunch. So just remember this when it's time to have your degree handed to you by President 11. I'm going to tell him that he got whooped by Captain Crunch. So what's interesting about this, of course, is how short the latency was between seeing the images and knowing what they're exposed to. And it's remarkable how fast you guys got these, but of course you're typical people from the United States who have been exposed to a barrage of this stuff over the life of your short lives so far already. So let's have a hand for the contestants here. Okay, so one of the images we showed was Tony the Tiger, and of course you know that they're great. So would anybody like to take a shot at doing the Tony the Tiger imitation? Last class, somebody nailed it unbelievably well. Anybody want to try? We've got a shy class this year. Okay, well, if anybody wants to step forward and do this later, we'll do it. But let's get moving along. One thing we did for the last time I taught this class in 2006 was give people a survey before the class on their knowledge and attitudes about food and related issues. And so one of the things we asked them in this survey, and unless there's something remarkably different about the 2006 class from you guys, then I would expect the results to be pretty similar had we asked you the same question. So we asked them, to what extent does food advertising affect others' food choices? And this will be as opposed to how much does it affect your food choices, of course. So here's what people said in terms of their feelings about how much food advertising affects other people. 50% of people said very much, and 42% said it affects people somewhat. So that's basically added up to about 100%. And there were some people that didn't respond and things like that, but you see there's not even a slice of the pie for not at all. And so the Yale students believe that food advertising affects others a lot. And of course, how could it be otherwise? The food industry is spending billions and billions of dollars to do this. They're not stupid. They wouldn't be spending the money if it didn't work. So this is probably pretty accurate if you could really go in and find out how much advertising did affect people. But what was interesting was we asked, to what extent does food advertising affect your food choices? And here we get a little bit different background, a little bit different breakdown, and it looks like this. Where you remember that 50% orange slice, in fact, I'll show you the two next to each other like this. And it's really quite a bit different. Now this becomes, and I don't think there's anything special about Yale students in this regard. I expect if we ask the general population, we get a similar background. Maybe the numbers would be a little bit different. But the fact is, people believe that advertising works and that it affects other people, but it doesn't affect them. Most everybody believes that. And if that's the case, it's one very strong social impediment for taking action to do something about food marketing if you believe it should be curtailed, restricted, regulated, or whatever. Because if people have that attribution, that I'm strong, I can resist it, but everybody else can't, then you can make the claim that, well, everybody else should be strong like me, and it's their fault if they're falling victim to advertising, so why should I do anything about it? So if you could calculate the number of people in the population that are affected by advertising, and then look from that to figure out how many people believe they're affected by advertising, you get this sort of disjunction in all likelihood. And that becomes very interesting. So marketing is a powerful, powerful force. It's having a strong impact on people, but people don't believe it's affecting them in particular. So what's at stake? A huge amount of money is at stake, and a lot of the diet is at stake here. And you can just look, now this is just advertising to children, and these numbers are incredibly large. But of course we lose sight of, big numbers are big numbers, and we don't pay attention necessarily to what they mean. But let's look at what this means for you as a typical person your age. By the time you graduated from high school, you will have seen 360,000 advertisements. 10,000 of those per year would have been for food. Per hour of TV, you would have seen 19 advertisements in total. 11 of them would be for food. And the percentage of those that would be for unhealthy foods come out to be 95%. An absolutely remarkable imbalance between what should be marketed to people. And the most striking thing of all is that this is just television. This doesn't take into account every time you walk past a soda machine, that big red Coca-Cola soda machine in schools. It ignores the billboards. It ignores everything you saw on the internet. It ignores the product placements in movies and televisions, all these other things that we'll bring up in just a minute. So it's really quite remarkable. What's changed a lot is the amount of advertising, but also the forms it comes in. When I was a boy, and I think I might have mentioned this before, the only advertising I really saw were Saturday morning cartoon advertisements for sugared cereals. There really wasn't much food advertising going on beyond that. There was some, but not a lot, and that was mainly the exposure. But it was only television. There really wasn't much else going on. And now the number of ways is really phenomenal. And so we'll cruise through some of these ways today and give you an overview of how much individuals are exposed to. So what I hope you form from this is a picture of what the typical American individual, let's say an American child and then somebody your age and somebody who's an adult, how much they've been exposed to, how many ways they've been exposed to it, and what impact this has on their lives. Because a lot is at stake here. A lot is potentially at stake for public health if the marketing landscape changes, and a lot is at stake, of course, for the industry because they are very heavy investors in marketing, as you saw. So there's marketing to new levels. There's traditional marketing, like the television things that we're all used to, but there's a whole nother generation of marketing that's out there now that has been called these things: stealth, guerrilla, and viral marketing. And you've probably heard some of these terms. Now, these are not terms that were developed by the nutrition advocacy communities who oppose marketing. These are terms generated by the industry itself, by the marketers, by the people who buy their services and things like that. And you can guess pretty much what the intent is from these words. But just stop to think for a moment about the morality of what these words mean. Do you want to be do you want to live in a culture, in a society, where people are marketing to you using guerrilla methods, using viral methods, using stealth methods? What is this? And sure, you guys are smart. You have some cognitive and intellectual resources to defend yourself against these things, although you're probably much less immune to it than you believe you are. But nonetheless, you have resources. But what about a child? And what if you're a parent? Do you want your children to be exposed to marketing techniques that the industry itself calls these things? And it raises some very interesting moral, legal, ethical kind of questions. So let's talk about the various ways. And I'm going to make some parallels with an industry that's well known to all of us and look at how similar some of the marketing methods are, between the food industry and this other industry too. So there's the development of original icons. So Tony the Tiger, all the ones that we showed you before are original icons. Tony the Tiger doesn't have any life outside of its association with that kind of a cereal. And Ronald McDonald, as you'll see, is one of the most widely recognized icons in the world. So these are very powerful. Now the parallel industry that did this same sort of thing would be the tobacco industry with things like the Marlboro Man. And the Marlboro Man became and still is a worldwide symbol of that particular product. And so there are some similarities in the way these industries have marketed things. But of course, it's not just food and tobacco. It's, lots of other things have original icons as well. There are so many examples of how marketing gets about, and this isn't a widely used form of marketing, but it's interesting. So you've got the kind of mobile marketing where you get this thing happening and you see the Kissmobile. And then of course, probably the most famous one of all, the Oscar Mayer thing. So that's another form of marketing, but it's not a big fraction of the overall marketing exposure. Here's one that's bigger and potentially more influential because children are involved. And because children are involved, they start developing brand loyalty, they start developing their image of what companies they should feel positive about and what kind of products are okay to eat. So co-branding with toys happens a good bit. And if you go to a Toys R Us these days or even a Walmart and look through the toy section, it's very interesting what you see. And you'll see a lot of these kind of things. I went 2 years ago when I was getting ready for this lecture in that previous class, and I was surprised by how many food-related things there were. But you got the McDonald's drive-in and the little toy set here where you can be the teller at the drive-in window. And then you can dispense all the foods, and you've got your little walkie-talkie and everything. And so that would be an example. But there are lots of other examples. You have this one for McDonald's. You have this one for McDonald's would be an example. Here's one from Hostess where you buy the little snack oven and you can make your own Twinkies and cupcakes. So you can learn to bake and bake these sort of things. Here's a Coca-Cola chess set that you can play. And so they're just, unbelievable number of examples of these sort of things. And so what they do, presumably, because the industry continues to invest in this, is that they associate the food with fun. They give children a lot of exposure to the food images and the logos and things like that. And in the case of the McDonald's thing, you're even training somebody to understand what goes on inside the restaurant. Character licensing is a really big issue. And this is an important issue because the industry has been criticized soundly for doing this. And a number of the players in the industry have made self-regulatory pledges. For example, they've said, well, we won't use our characters and associate them with unhealthy foods. There's a lot of question about whether they're actually following through, and things like that are now being tested. But at least there are pledges going on. And we'll talk in a later class about why industry makes changes on their own when they're not forced to do it. And there are a lot of discussions one can have about why an industry would be motivated to do that. But among the possible motivations is that they want to make the appearance that they're able to police themselves so they don't stand in the line of fire from government, for government to crack down on the marketing practices. So there's a lot of character licensing. We talked about the Flintstones before. And as you know, Flintstones are on cereals like this, but they're also on a lot of other things. So somebody mentioned the vitamins, but you see the ice cream, you see two kinds of cereal, and you see the Pez containers. So the Flintstones are really everywhere, and they're remarkably powerful, and they've existed for years and years and years in this context. Now, something you may not know is that the Flintstones have a long history of being licensed to industries to associate characters with products. And this is not made up, this is for real. So here's Fred Flintstone back at a time when the Flintstones were being used to sell cigarettes. And these are similar images from that sort of thing. Now, you look at this and it appears absolutely shocking, doesn't it? I mean, you've got these images that are embedded in the American psyche, images where kids are very highly influenced. Kids love the Flintstones. and they see something like this, what does it do to them? And so this is the sort of thing that would generate outrage and shock and wouldn't be permitted. In fact, isn't permitted. Will there be a day when we'll have the similar view of the Flintstones associated with push-up ice cream, with sugared cereals and the like? Well, I can't predict the future, but there are some signs of this sort of public outrage beginning to mount around this kind of thing. And the character licensing becomes an important feature of that. But of course, there's a lot more going on than just the Flintstones. Here you see Shrek, you see Dora the Explorer, and you see Scooby-Doo. So let's see, when I was writing the Food Fight book, you guys may remember this from the section in Food Fight. When I was writing that book, I went with my daughter and a boy that she babysat for, and we became the surveillance team, and we went to a supermarket in Branford, the town where I lived, and we went to the supermarket just to spot every instance of a licensed character for some food, and we just made a list of it, and that's what we put down in the book. Well, our research team at the Rudd Center has gone back in subsequent years, 2 times, separated by a few years each, to see whether the landscape has really changed, and it hasn't very much. There's still approximately the same number of food products with licensed characters on them, and the food products are every bit as unhealthy as they were before. So the industry saying that we can clean up our house and we can regulate on ourselves is disputed by some people, and they're critical of the self-regulation and say that's an argument for government being involved. The industry says, oh no, we're really making progress. It's going to take some time, and we have these long-term contracts with the food vendors, between the food vendors and the people that own the copyrights for the licensed characters, and it's going to take some time for those contracts to expire, and that may be a legitimate argument. Only time will tell whether the self-regulatory pledges matter. But obviously, this is having an effect on food consumption. It's one of those things where you almost don't have to test it, although researchers, including us, will. But you almost don't have to, because you just say, why would the industry spend the money doing this if it's not working? Because they know, they're pretty smart about the use of their money. But that doesn't mean that we know exactly how much effect it has on people and how strong the effect on their diet and their health would be. SpongeBob is interesting, and I was talking to somebody from Nickelodeon, which owns SpongeBob. So this is several years back. I'm not sure if the number is still the same, but they said that they make $1 billion a year just from SpongeBob, the licensing of SpongeBob. Forget the show, and forget the advertising that happens during the show. This is just for the licensing of SpongeBob for various products, and you can see some examples of them here. So there's a lot of character licensing going on, and people come down in different places about this. Some people feel, well, it's sort of free enterprise, and the people who develop these characters, a company like Nickelodeon or Disney or Warner Brothers or whoever it is, has invested a lot. They've taken some risk in this, and they create a character that works and has some public visibility, that it's their perfect right to cash in on that and to use it in whatever way is going to benefit the company and its shareholders. And other people say, well, companies profiting and benefiting their shareholders is good, but only to the point where you're not damaging the public health. And when you get to that point, we're going to step in and do something about it. And people will come down in all places here. Some people say we shouldn't get involved. Other people say government should. Some people say industry self-regulation is enough, and other people say it doesn't. There are a lot of opinions on this, but this is the landscape. You may like it, you may not, but that's the landscape. Another interesting thing that the food industry does is associate foods with a lot of different things. And some of them are even educational in nature. So how many of you at some point in your academic life, going back to the early years, can remember something that was associated with food, like a book jacket cover, umbrellas in your school that had food company logos on them, computers that had something on them related? How many of you would say that something like that happened along the way? Okay, not too many. Well, I mean, some, but the number seems to be declining, which is good because the schools' landscapes are starting to change. But you see lots of examples of this thing. So here are books. These I just checked out on Amazon, and books available that for young kids. And so you've got M&M's Math, Twizzlers Percentage Book, Fruit Loops Counting Fun Book, and the Kisses Subtraction Book. And of course, this is not the whole universe of these things, it's just examples. But these have pretty interesting effects on kids. Now, if you're a parent, does it make sense to buy a book like this for your child? Well, it depends on your aim. If your aim is to get them excited about math, or subtraction, or percentages, and of course they know these products and they like these products, then it might make sense to do it. You know, if you had the Hershey Kisses subtraction book, you know, maybe that would be better than the broccoli and cauliflower subtraction book. And it might actually get kids to do more of the math. We don't know that to be the case, but a parent might think that. But then is there a nefarious downside here because of the branding that goes on and the exposure to kids to you know, making these products seem more legitimate and more good and associated with learning and things like that? These are all testable questions. These are things that one could do if you get in to do the research. Some research has been done on these things, but there are big gaps in our knowledge. But again, you can make up your own mind about whether the overall impact of something like this is good or bad, and how the two countervailing forces might offset or not offset each other. Here's another example, the M&M's Christmas gift book. But again, there are many, many things like that out there. A very prominent way to advertise these days, and you guys are savvy enough to understand at least some of it, are product placements. Product placements, it's an interesting history of this. And I learned a little bit actually about this last night when I was reading up on it. And I learned a little bit more about the history than I knew. I thought that it was a pretty recent phenomenon, and going back maybe 30 years, but in fact it goes back even further than that. But there was only a little bit of it over the years, and then it exploded, and now it's at an all-time high, and product placements are occurring all over the place. But a little bit of the history looks like this. The first one that people believe occurred was within a movie called Wings in 1927, and Hershey was the product that was placed, paid, you know, there were payments presumably took place at that point, and the product got placed in the movie. And then you see the other examples there. And then the one that people cite as the most modern, the modern start of this with food, there were tobacco ones that occurred, and in fact still do occur in movies, where characters are paid, or the producers are paid to depict people smoking in movies. So, you know, it's interesting when you watch a movie, for example, and you see somebody smoking cigarettes, to stop and pause and say, well, is that something that they wrote into the script because it really needed to be there, or is somebody being paid to do that? And I don't know what percentage fall into those two categories, but there certainly is a lot of payment going on for that kind of thing. So E.T. has been cited as the first one to do food product placements in the modern era. And does anybody know what product that was? Reese's Pieces, that's exactly right. So that's a pretty blurry picture there, but it shows the E.T. character with the Reese's Pieces. So that turned out, from the industry's point of view, to be a pretty good thing to do. And then lots of other product placements have occurred over the years. But most people don't realize how much of it there is in various movies and things. So here's an example, and just a few visual examples of this. This movie, American Dreams, has the character looking, and you can see the soup cans sitting there on the kitchen counter. And I don't remember seeing this movie, and I just certainly don't remember this particular scene. So, you know, who knows whether these are part of the plot line going on. One would guess probably not, but they're there as a visual image. And so the cash register rings, the people who make American Dreams make money, the Campbell's Soup people pay them, and then these sort of product placements are occurring. Now, this is an example of stealth marketing. If you're watching television and a commercial comes on in the middle of a show, you know that the advertising has begun, that the show has now stopped, the advertising has now begun, and then that stops and the show resumes. So there's this cognitive awareness that advertising is occurring, and people who want to protect themselves from it or buffer themselves from it are cued to when the advertising is occurring. But more and more, the marketers are finding that that's not such an effective way to advertise. They still do plenty of it, believe me, as you know, but they're finding that it's losing its impact. There are technological reasons that it's losing its impact. People TiVo things, they record things, they fast forward through commercials. They get up and leave the room, they make phone calls, they go to their cell phone and do email. A lot of things distract people from those traditional messages. So what the marketers have found is to overcome that, you have to do things that where people can't escape the marketing image. They just can't get away from it if they're going to be exposed to that form of media. Plus, the natural defense that some people have that kicks in when you start seeing an advertisement. So you don't process this, of course, each time you see an ad, but the basic cognitive script inside somebody's head is, okay, advertising has begun. So let's say you're watching some documentary or something, and you say, okay, now at this moment I'm going to switch from watching this documentary, which is more or less objective information, and nobody's trying to sell me anything, to the advertisement where somebody does have commercial intent, they're trying to get me to buy their product, and I may listen to it, I may not, but at least you know that it's going on. But in this case, you don't necessarily know that it's going on. People are becoming a little more aware, but it's happening a lot. And you can't escape it unless you just don't watch the movie. And people who have less cognitive defense, children in particular, might be especially vulnerable to these kind of messages. Here you see the Tom Hanks movie with the Starbucks logo in the background. And so there are lots of examples of this kind of thing. There's some very prominent ones. Somebody did an analysis of this particular movie called The Forgotten, and down at the bottom are all the different product placements that occurred in this movie. So if you happen to have gone to this movie or you see a movie like this, you don't go and you sit down and say, there are going to be 30 advertisements within this movie. And I've got to be alert to them. I've got to watch for them. I've got to present some defense against them. You don't do that, of course. You just watch the movie. And in fact, if you knew all this was going on, it may hurt your enjoyment of the movie. But of all these different things that you see in here, so the movie makers cash in. They've got the movie, they make money from the movie, but they make money from all these people who are paying to have their images embedded in the movie. And then you can see the list of 5 food-related things. Yes?
What kind of compensation do these companies get for advertising?
It's a good question. How much compensation do they get? And I don't know. It'd be interesting to find that out. Like, what was the Coca-Cola exposure? It'd be interesting to go through this movie and find out exactly where Coca-Cola is in it, what kind of imagery was used, and how much got paid for that, and I just don't know. And what would be interesting to know, and we will never know, but the industry does, but it's all proprietary information, is for every dollar you spend, how much of your product gets consumed? I mean, what's the bang for the buck, in other words? And if you could list all these forms of marketing, where does product placement fit in with television advertising, with kids' games, with books, whatever it happens to be? And I don't know the answer to that. It'd be very interesting to know. And here's where that question has a special relevance. And we'll talk about this later in class. But there was a time in the 1960s and 70s where a federal law got passed called the Fairness Doctrine. And what it did was it demanded for the tobacco industry in particular and for the television industry that every time a tobacco ad was aired on television, there had, for every a certain amount of that, there had to be equal time, excuse me, for anti-smoking messages. So the TV networks were required to air anti-smoking programs when they were doing tobacco advertisements. And in the beginning, what happened is that these anti-tobacco ones they were being shown during public service announcements at 3 a.m. in the morning, and the other stuff, of course, was being shown on prime time. But they became more and more prominent with time. And what the industry found is that for every dollar they were spending on marketing their products, they were getting burned because of the anti-tobacco message. So they were losing money doing this in terms of overall sales. So what did the tobacco industry do? Now, nobody knew this. The public health, except them. The public health community didn't know. Government officials didn't know. But the industry came in and did exactly what the food industry is doing now, saying, we'll police ourselves. We care about the health of our customers. I can show you some great quotes on that. We're deeply concerned with the welfare and the health and the well-being of our customers. And so we're going to voluntarily withdraw advertising on television. But what we need in return is a guarantee that government's not going to take away other forms of advertising. And so what they yielded on was a form of marketing that the public health community didn't know and the government officials didn't know was cost ineffective. They were losing money doing this. And they gave it away, as if it were a big public health maneuver. People celebrated this, even prominent people in public health, because at that time people thought television is the medium. And if they give in on that, that's a really big advance. But it turned out to not be the case, because in every dollar they took away from that form of marketing that was losing them money, they put into other forms of marketing that were getting more people to smoke. So the question is, that same process being played out in food now, and we don't know. That history is being written right now, but it's an interesting, and this is, the product placements are not something that the industry is necessarily embarrassed about, because they're awards for who does it best, believe it or not, which is interesting. Now I suspect this is going to change, because people are becoming more aware of these kind of things and are thinking it may not be the best thing for our well-being. Now, one of the more prominent examples of product placement would be this, the American Idol show, where you see the Coca-Cola glasses in front of the 3 judges. Okay, so the question got asked about how much does this cost? Well, in this case we know, at least we know informally. I was at an event in California and met one of these judges, and I was talking about these Coca-Cola glasses. Well, that judge said several things that were very interesting. And it's just the report of that person to me, so this is nothing official. But what that person said is that this was a $40 million exchange between Coca-Cola and the show, and also said that none of them drink Coca-Cola out of those glasses. Not that that matters so much, because people aren't attending to what's in the glasses, it's just the appearance of what's in the glasses. So $40 million is a lot of money, but this is a very popular show. The exposure of kids to this is absolutely enormous, although it's not programming just for kids. And so what happens to your cognitive defenses here? And what happens to the cognitive defenses of children? They see this, and very few people pause and say, oh, well, this is bought and paid for. I'm now being advertised to. And kids especially then might see something like this and code it as, although not articulating it this way, but this is what goes into the brain and gets coded, is that, these are fabulously wealthy, famous people, there are lots to admire about them, and they drink Coca-Cola. So this would be an example of product placements, which is an example of stealth marketing. You don't know you're being marketed to necessarily. You're not being told. There's no demarcation between the show and the advertisement, but it's still happening. All right, let's talk about schools for a moment. There's a lot of marketing that goes on in schools. And yes, it's true that school systems are beginning to cut back on this, a lot from public pressure and a lot because school officials are starting to become alarmed at what's actually happened to the school landscape. But there's still a lot goes on, and you can see examples of how these things are happening in schools. How many of you remember being exposed to Channel 1 in school? It's the TV news broadcast that you would have that would be shown for short times of the day. How many again? Oh, so a fair amount of you, okay. Well, of course, what happens in that exchange is that the Channel 1 people give video equipment to schools, so it's sort of a free gift for the schools. But what they agree to in exchange is showing doing that programming, which is partly news and partly advertising, for a certain amount of the school day. And then kids are exposed to advertising from some of the large food companies. And the most recent example of that is something called bus radio, where some enterprising company has figured out a way to give radio equipment to buses so they can pipe in stuff coming from radios, and there's usually music on it, music that would be appropriate to the demographics of that particular group that's on the bus, but advertising is interspersed. And they're selling it to the schools by saying that this helps calm kids down, it reduces discipline problem on buses and the like, and the school people don't have to pay for it. So it's a free gift in one way, but is it really a gift after all if the advertising going on is hurting the health of the kids? And again, there's another example of plus and minus. There's some benefit potentially to it, but there's some downside, and how do these two things balance? Well, there's an empirical test of this. One can do studies and really find out this, although they're hard to do and they cost money. But then there's also almost a philosophical test. Where do you stand with this? Do you believe that is inherently bad to be exploiting kids by doing this sort of thing? And the school systems that are really there to protect and enrich our kids is collaborating in the process, maybe that's inherently or morally wrong. Or is it just capitalism at work? Depends on your perspective, but there's an up and down side of most of these sort of things. Now the school landscape has changed entirely. Now when I was a kid, this is what the school landscape looked like, if there was anything like this in the schools at all. And in my high school, I don't even remember if there was a soda machine. I sort of have this image of one machine somewhere in the school, but I'm not sure I'm recollecting that correctly. But if there were any machines, there would have just been one, and it would have looked something like this. And of course, it would have been a 6.5 or 8 ounce bottle. But what, the school landscapes these days are looking more and more like this. And so when my son, Kevin, was in the Branford High School, and this was, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago, 9, 10 years ago, something. He and I went to his school after school one day, and we went through the school, and this was all written up in the food fight book, and there were 13 machines in that school. I mean, I had none or one, he had 13. And of course, you know what's being sold in those machines. So this is the landscape. So schools have become a marketing opportunity. Now, should a parent be mad about this? Should you be mad about it? Should the students be mad about it? Well, the defense against this is that the schools make money, and that these kids can walk right by those machines. There's nothing making them put money in the machines and buy it. But the companies say, if you really talk to them, that they don't make an awful lot of money from the sales of the things in the schools because they have to split the income with the schools. They do make some, but they say, it's really not a big money maker for us. But think of the branding and think of the advertising. I mean, these kids may sit in this lunchroom every day, and every day they're exposed to that. It's brightly colored, it's right there in their faces. And so you can't deny probably that it has impact, or again, why would the industry do it? Now the industry for many years, the soft drink industry, and their trade association that represents them has said, we're doing the schools good. Schools are profiting from this because it pays for the soccer uniforms, it pays for the band trip, it pays for the debate team and things like that. And to some extent that's true. But the industry has dressed it up as if they're helping support these things. Like the Coca-Cola company is writing a check to Branford High School for the band, let's say. But they're not doing that. The soft drink companies aren't putting the dollars into the machines. Those are the kids and the parents of the community who are paying money into the machines, and the soft drink industry takes a cut of it. So you could make the case that it's just like a tax on the people in the community, a voluntary tax, because people can choose whether to put money in the machine, but it's the members of the community who are paying ultimately for the band uniforms and the soccer trips and all those sort of things. But some of the money gets siphoned off to go to the industry, so overall it may not be a very effective way for the community to fund its education. So here would be an example of the scoreboard that was on the football field at Branford. And so, this all looks good. Coca-Cola supports the Branford Hornets. Well, one could reverse that and say the Branford Hornets support Coca-Cola, couldn't you? So it's interesting. My children were on swim teams, and at one swim meet that we went to, these were the chairs that they sat in. So you see these kind of things around a good bit. And it's really true that the schools have become a commercial opportunity. You see examples like this, Ronald McDonald in front of those enraptured children. And Ronald's probably not there saying you should eat chicken nuggets, may not ever say anything about McDonald's products themselves, but there's a clear association going on here. And the association of McDonald's in education settings, it happens a lot in the schools. In fact, almost every year the New Haven Register has a story about some school system where the teachers go and become counter clerks at McDonald's for an evening. And then people from the community, from the school are told about this. They come in, they get to see their teachers working behind the counter, and the school gets some money from it. But what's the overall impact? And here would be another example of that kind of thing. So the schools have become a commercial opportunity. Should they be? Should a public school become a place where some company that has nothing to do with education profits? And especially if there's some negative impact on our kids. And of course, everybody comes down on that. Now, one of the newest forms of marketing, as you can only imagine, is the internet. And some people have documented the presence of something that's called advergaming, which are games mainly for children that are really advertisements. And I'll show you some examples of these. Now again, the internet becomes interesting because there are questions about how much the parent actually knows about what kids are seeing on the internet and how much control they have over it. So to the extent they're getting a lot of negative messages about food, could have an effect. So here's an example of a website that I captured yesterday. So these are all current. So this is a Burger King one where kids go on and join the Club BK and play all these engaging games and things. And then within the games, there are products from the company, of course, as you might imagine. Here's an example of one called Postopia. You see that up here, that has all these different games that kids can play. So it'd be pretty hard to run out of imagination there and time to play all those games. So those are for post-serials, as you might imagine. And I don't know if this is still current, but several years ago on the post-serial Postopia website, and some of the advertising they were doing was this thing for kids: eat cereal, save the world, and it has all the characters there. So, you know, it seems funny, and, you know, what's the big harm here? Well, maybe there's not much harm, who knows? But you could also say that, you know, this idea that these cereals, and you see them down here in the box, you know, the honeycomb, the fruity pebbles, cocoa pebbles, golden crisp, the Oreo O's cereal, that kids are seeing: eat cereal, save the world, here are the cereals that you should save the world with. You've got the superheroes, all this kind of stuff. What kind of impact does that have? Here's another example of a Skittles website. And if you want to go to these things and actually see them, in fact, this might make an interesting project for somebody in the class, if you don't have a final project idea, is to go into some of these websites and actually analyze what's there. And the URLs are listed right at the top of each of these things. So there's a Skittles one. Here's a particularly colorful one with lots of different games. So you can go into the arcade with your mouse, you can pick one of these games and then play it. And then, of course, within these are embedded the products. And so you earn points by capturing the product or finding the product in hidden places. And again, I don't know if this is current, but there was a time where kids would earn points by doing well at the games, and then they'd hit a certain barrier, and they would be told that you can get to the next barrier if you give us the email address of a friend. And then, of course, the friend becomes a target of opportunity and so that's the whole viral part of it spreading. Here's an example of the Fruit Gushers one where you redo your room. So there are many, many examples of those things, and again, they're current as of yesterday. There was a report written on this by the Kaiser Family Foundation that really is good. And again, if anybody needs an idea for a project, you can go get this report. It's right on the web at the website I listed there. It talks about how much of it there is and what effects it might be having on kids. So it's a very interesting phenomenon. It's a new generation of marketing. And one of the issues really becomes, does a parent's ability to regulate their child's exposure to these things get eroded? And say when I was a kid, and then when my kids were kids, and when you guys were kids, is the parent's role in this less than it used to be because they don't know all the forms that's coming in, and they're not with their kids all the time, so they just can't regulate it. And some people may think that doesn't really matter because it's not having much impact, or they think, well, that's sort of real life, so what's the big deal? Or somebody may feel that that's really not good, that parents do have the authority, the responsibility for their kids. And if parents want to raise their kids in a commercial-free environment, it's becoming more and more difficult to do it. Celebrity endorsements, of course, are a big part of the picture, and you can probably construct in your own mind, a vast list of people who have endorsed food products. I mean, can you just give me examples just from things you know off the top of your head? Tiger Woods doing food? Doing lots like Nike and things like that. That's true. What about food in particular? Go ahead.
Michael Phelps and Frosted Flakes.
Okay, Michael Phelps and Frosted Flakes, current one from the Olympics. Okay, so teams with things like Nature Valley bars. Other examples? Yes. Okay, who with Pepsi? Okay, David Beckham with Pepsi. Yes.
Michael Jordan used to have his own meal at McDonald's.
Okay, Michael Jordan and McDonald's.
Michael Jordan also had the ballpark drinks.
Okay.
Dogs.
Michael Jordan and hot dogs. Yes. Okay, the Got Milk has a long line of celebrities. That's exactly right. Okay, so just go ahead. Okay, Campbell's Chunky Soup with athletes, especially football players, yes?
Kobe Bryant and Sprite.
Kobe Bryant and Sprite. Okay, so great. In just this short time, we came up with lots of examples of these sort of things. So my guess is that I don't know how much it costs to get Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant or David Beckham to endorse your product, but my guess is it's probably not cheap, or else they wouldn't give their names away that way. But it's worth it to the companies, of course, because of the associations that people make, probably especially kids. This has a long history as well. So here's Ronald Reagan before he became president doing cigarettes. And there are many examples of this. So on the left you have Mrs. Humphrey Bogart, that at the time was Lauren Bacall. And so she talks about how great it is to do this sort of tobacco. And there you have doctors. More doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarettes. So, you know, these examples are interesting. And, you know, you say, well, that's the old times, and, you know, we would never put up with that now. Well, that's right, but how different is it from the food endorsements that are going on? You know, you can make up your own mind about that, but there are some people who say there are startling similarities between what happened with tobacco and what happened with food. And could it be? So today, if some popular celebrity endorsed cigarettes, I mean, let's just say Michael Jordan, Tiger Woods, Kobe Bryant, David Beckham, whoever it was, did a cigarette ad, and they were shown smoking cigarettes and saying, this is good for you, their public image would go down the toilet in a second. They would never do that. It would be a huge public relations liability. And the public would be outraged. My guess is that the league that represents them might even step in and take action because of the message it sends to kids. But you see this sort of thing. So it's really quite remarkable. So here are just some of the examples with food. Here's a Pepsi one, and the Burger King with Shaquille O'Neal. Somebody mentioned Beckham, so you see that. And here you have Venus and Serena Williams doing McDonald's, so there are many examples of that. Now the sports sponsorships are very interesting as well. There's a history that goes back with this. So you've got the NASCAR Winston Cup Series is an example of something that's happened previously. Does anybody remember the first time that an industry got involved with sponsorship of women's sports? Okay, before your time. But it was a Virginia Slims tennis tour, women's tennis tour. And so there are lots of quotes back at that time from prominent women's tennis players saying, well, this is a huge advance for women's tennis because it brought up the amount of income they could make at tournaments, it made it more visible, there was a lot of positive things that happened from the athletic point of view for women's tennis. It really had a great impact on that from that point of view. But of course, it associated it with this particular brand of cigarettes. And there are lots of food examples now. So this year, the Fiesta Bowl was the national championship game. I forget who played and which year it was. But here you have a prominent sports sponsorship. You've got the race cars thing, so NASCAR is involved. And then this is the Pepsi Center in Denver, where the basketball and I believe the hockey teams play. So this is pretty prominent happening today, too. There's another form of advertising that's interesting about buying up space, I'll call it, where the advertisers are advertising in interesting ways. So here would be an example of that kind of thing, where they have people are paid to have this stuff put on their cars. Here would be another example, a non-food related one. But you know, somebody has the RV, a company can pay them potentially to have their RV becoming a mobile advertisement. And then there are companies, I actually know this because there's a person that I'm acquainted with who does this sort of thing, who's in business to do this kind of thing, to sell the sides of trucks, to broker deals between a truck company and the company, in this case Pizza Hut, to use the side of the truck to become a mobile advertiser. So you probably assume that if you see this truck on the highway that there are Pizza Hut things inside the truck, that it has something to do with the company, but that's not necessarily true. So what's happened with marketing, more or less, is that every moment of the day, every opportunity to expose you to messages is being exploited. Well, I mean, there are probably some that aren't being exploited, but will. But there are people test marketing everything now. Test marketing advertisements on a little flash screen above the urinals in restrooms. And I'll talk about some new frontiers as well, but there are potentially almost no time when you're safe from it if you consider the exposure to be not good. Packaging is interesting. Now here's an example I promised you of Cookie Crisp cereal, a General Mills cereal. And part of the packaging here is what you see in the top right-hand corner, this thing called the goodness corner, and I'll blow that up for you. So here's the goodness corner for Cookie Crisp cereal. So what happens here is General Mills creates its own set of symbols. They say, okay, we're going to define what's good for you and what's not. We're going to set our own standards for what it means to be low in sugar, or low in fat, or low in salt, or whatever. And then we're going to take our own self-designed symbols and apply them to our own products. So the consumer sees this kind of thing, and what do they make of it? Well, we don't know. But the obvious intent here is to make something like Cookie Crisp cereal seem like a good thing. And in this case, you have the 12 vitamins and minerals. Well, let's break down each of these three symbols. By the way, General Mills has a whole bunch of symbols. I don't know how many, but it might be 10 or 12 symbols that you can apply to cereal. And the definitions they use and the number of potential symbols one can apply means that there's probably no food ever made in the history of humankind that doesn't qualify for at least some symbol. And they even have one that says energy. It's a symbol that says energy. Well, you may remember from earlier classes what energy means. It means calories. So it has calories. But it's in the goodness corner. So what does that mean? Well, okay, 12 vitamins and minerals. Let's start with that. American children, for the most part, are not vitamin and mineral deficient. And if they were, is this the medium in which you'd like to see the vitamins and minerals delivered? Well, probably not. Good source of calcium. Well, the calcium is from the milk. So you could pour milk on a rock and call it a good source of calcium. Now, think about the low fat. Well, sort of a basic reality of food is if you want people to really like it, you have to put in either a lot of fat, a lot of sugar, or both. And what the industry has found, for the most part, is that you can reduce one, but you have to push up the other, or else people won't like it as much. And so that was the Snackwell cookie phenomenon. Snackwell cookies came out with low-fat cookies. Many people, the urban lore is that many people felt licensed to eat a lot of them because they were low in fat. But the company found, Nabisco I believe, found that when they reduced the fat in these cookies, people didn't like them as much, so they had to jack up the sugar. So the Snackwells were the same in calories after the fat was reduced as they were before the fat was taken out, if there even was a Snackwells at that point. But the calories are the same, but they get marketed in a certain way. So low in fat, but probably very high in sugar. And if it's high in sugar, it could be low in fat. So you can see how a self-serving system of symbols like this could lead people to believe that something is healthier than it really is. Now, just on Monday, and I'll talk about this in class next week, in Monday there was an announcement by a whole conglomeration of food companies that they're going to start using a system of standard symbols that they call smart choices. So we'll walk through what that means and why the industry would do that. Is it good for nutrition or bad? So we'll talk through that. Now, interestingly, on the side of the Cookie Crisp cereal, when I took this picture, was an endorsement by the American Heart Association that this is somehow good for you. Well, yes, it meets the American Heart Association's criteria for saturated fat and cholesterol, but what about the sugar in this thing? Isn't the American Heart Association concerned with diabetes, obesity, all kinds of things related to high sugar intake, high sodium intake? Don't they care about that stuff? Well, of course they do. So you have to ask, what would compel the American Heart Association to lend its credibility and its resources and things like that for the sale of Cookie Crisp cereal? Well, I can't read their minds, but certainly money changes hands in a transaction like that. So it's interesting, if you're the food industry, it's interesting who you can buy. You can buy Kobe Bryant, you can buy Michael Jordan, you can buy Beckham, you can buy the Williams sisters, you can buy them. Maybe they're not all for sale, but at least some of them are, and I don't know if all those stars would still do it, but at least at one point they did. you can buy the American Heart Association. Now that might be critical of the American Heart Association, and they may object to this characterization that they're just being bought off. They might view it as, well, we're trying to teach people what's good to eat and stuff like that. But a lot of people would say this is not good to eat. So my guess is that if you took all the nutritionists that are engaged with the American Heart Association, one and another, and said, should we be eating more or less of Cookie Crisp cereal, what do you think they'd say? And then you get this kind of thing going on. So it's interesting. The industry will change the name of things. So Sugar Frosted Flakes changed name to Frosted Flakes, so the sugar gets lost. Super Sugar Crisp becomes called Golden Crisp, so they lose sugar in the name as well. Not necessarily the products are changed, just the name. Here was an interesting one, Honey Bunches of Oats. There was a time many years ago when I agreed to serve on a one-time expert committee for Post cereals. And I don't do any of this stuff anymore, but it was pretty interesting at the time. So we went to their headquarters. It was General Foods at that time, one of the biggest food companies in the US, if not the biggest. And this was in White Plains, New York. So we went to their headquarters. They told us about all the things they were doing, and they were really eager for us to try a brand new cereal. And so we had to sign a form that said we wouldn't tell anybody about this brand new cereal. We wouldn't go tell Kellogg's about this new cereal. And they had people in white coats bring in these bowls with some of the new cereal, and they poured milk on them, and they wanted us to try it. Well, it turned out to be Honey Bunches of Oats, and it was, tasted pretty good. And then they showed us some of the marketing that they were going to do. And I think as I recall, the marketing they did were two prominent comedian-type people. It was Harvey Korman and Tim Conway were going to be marketing the cereal, so we saw that. And then some, because it was a bunch of nutrition people. I was the only non-certified nutritionist there. But I wondered what was in this cereal. And so I started to ask, because it looked to me from my naked, naive eye that there wasn't a lot of oats in it. And so I said, what's in it? And so they said, well, what's the first ingredient? And they said what it was, corn or whatever. And I said, what's the second most common ingredient? Well, it's wheat or rice or something. And I said, well, are we going to get to oats here sometime? And oats was number 4. And so the ingredient list is this: corn, whole wheat, sugar, and rolled oats. So this is actually, oats is the 4th ingredient, not the first. And one could call this more appropriately Honey Bunches of Sugar, because there's more sugar in it than there is oats, according to the food label. Now I asked them, why do you call it Honey Bunches of Oats? Their response was, consumers have told us that they like oats. Well, what's the morality of that kind of thing? There's this interesting thing occurring. I don't know if any of you have noticed this, but you may remember that in the very first class, for those of you who were here, the Burger King ad that I showed you, that was, we are man, and it was for the Texas Double Whopper. And they're not the only example of this, where there's this sort of idea that nobody should tell us what to do. We're men, and we should eat a lot of food. And so the Burger King one, I won't show it to you again today because of time, because most of you probably remember it, but there was a very strong message in here that no sissies are going to tell us what to do with our eating. We're going to eat the Texas Double Whopper if we want it, and that's what men deserve, and we can do whatever we want. But there are lots of other examples of that too. If I can reverse here, this Hungry Man breakfast here that I'll talk about in a later class is an example of that. And then there's this Taco Bell one that I think is pretty recent, that is the Big Bell box. And if you look up on the left-hand corner, packed with all your favorites, it's the meal that's made for men. And then notice the low cost, only $4.99. Okay, let's look at the advertisement for this.
You deserve a meal made for men. Entry Taco Bell's Big Box Meal. A bean burrito, crunchy taco, cinnamon twist, a large drink, and featuring the Bacon Club chalupa. Eat like a man.
Well, eat like a man. Well, how should a man eat? Now let's do a little, oops, I gotta wait to get this out of here. Let's do a little nutrient breakdown of this particular meal. So we'll look at fat, sodium, and calories. Okay, here's the first item that's in it. The Burrito Supreme, the Crunch Wrap Supreme, the Cinnamon Twist, and the Mountain Dew Baja Blast. So here's the amount of fat and calories, and let's compare this to what the total, add up the total numbers that you see here and the daily recommendation. So the government standards say that we should eat no more than 65 grams of fat a day, and here's how much fat is in that single meal. Not for the whole day, just that meal. And then calories, 1,980 calories. The recommended total for the day is 2,000. And let's look at the sodium numbers. Now, most people don't know what recommended sodium levels are, but if you add all these things up, it's 4,210. Daily recommendation is 1,500 milligrams of sodium per day. But eat like a man. And then there are some things that are really almost beyond imagining. So here's a little quiz. Here are two people whose names you probably wouldn't recognize, but were in the news at one point. I'd like to see a show of hands about which of these things you think is true. Okay, so wanting to cash in as Jared did, they contacted Subway claiming that eating their subs had increased IQ by 30 points in the case of Fisher and landed a modeling contract in the case of Smith, set a world team record for eating Hostess Ding Dongs, were paid to have company logos tattooed on their faces, were married and had twins they named Twinkie and Dorito. How many of you believe A is the right answer? How many B? How many C? And how many D? Interesting. C and D take the day. So you too can become an advertisement. Yes? You know, I don't know how much they were paid. It might have been in the news accounts, but I just don't remember. Here's another example of something that really strains the imagination. Functioning 8-ounce baby bottles with soft drink company logos on them. There are new frontiers with marketing. So, for example, one is the cell phone. So it will soon be the case, because cell phones, most modern ones, have a GPS built into them, that when you power up the cell phone, there's a computer somewhere that knows where you are in space. And what the plan is to start beaming people advertisements specific to their location. So tens of millions of kids every afternoon get off school and power up a cell phone. And a computer knows where they are. So how far away are we from your cell phone having something like this? And again, it affects parents' ability to monitor these things. The newest frontier of all is neuromarketing, people doing research using brain imaging and other biological techniques to find out ways to more effectively market products. Does it work? Well, common sense says yes, it works. Otherwise, why would the industry spend money? But you see data like this, the world's top 100 recognized brands, and Coca-Cola is number 1, McDonald's number 9 on that. So it's effective. Coca-Cola, Coke, is the second most widely recognized word in the world, next to okay. Ronald McDonald, and you can see some statistics here, the second most recognized icon in the whole world. It was introduced in 1963, and what a little fact some people don't know is that the first Ronald McDonald was weatherman Willard Scott inside the costume. There are authoritative reports on food marketing, and we can give you the resources for each of these. But we looked at these reports to see how many said that there was not awareness of intent of marketing for kids, that it affected food preferences, beliefs, purchase requests, and assumptions, and you basically see everything being filled in there. So it is known from science now that food marketing has this kind of an impact. It really affects kids. And so in a later class, we'll talk about how all these things come together. I mean, if you add up all the scientific literature, and I have to do it in 8 seconds, it would be something like this, that food marketing appears to be happening in very large amounts in ways that parents don't have knowledge over, can control, and is having a highly negative impact on kids. So what can be done, and this is what we're going to be talking about in the politics class. So, before you leave, oh, and our guest lecturer on Monday, by the way, is an associate dean from New York University named Rogan Kirsch, who's very good, and you'll enjoy hearing from him.